The new regenerative air sweepers, A7s, A8s, and A9s, they are, the electrical system is CANBUS. CANBUS is actually a communication system, so therefore there's not all the functions are not hardwired all the way from the console to the control box. So we're going to demonstrate how everything is actually coming to life and how everything works with the CANBUS system. So as soon as the ignition switch turns on the chassis, eventually, immediately, the console will get enabled. You're going to have power coming to the console. Blue lights means that the console is actually communicating with the control box. When the console is being enabled, you're going to see all the analog information coming from the sensors of the sweeper into the monitor. Okay. All right, now we're going to go back into the control box and open the cover on the control box, and of course show you where everything is going on there as well. This is the control box that is situated behind the driver's side of the sweeper, behind the cab. And what we see here is two fuse boxes. They look like this. And then you see a series of different fuses that they actually powering up different functions on the controller. And of course the relays that are in the fuse boxes. Now please note that all the relays are actually the same, so for troubleshooting sakes, these can be moved back and forth to make sure that the relay is not a problem in any kind of lost power situation. Now, when the blue light's actually coming on the console, there's also two blue lights flashing at 2 hertz, one here and one here. On the inside, you can see the blue light flashing at 2 hertz. When you have the blue flashing lights on both sides of the controller flashing at 2 hertz, that will tell you immediately that you have communication between the console and the controller. At some point of time, of course, it is a possibility that the blue flashing lights are not there. And instead of blue, it could be a green flashing or steady green light. At that point, of course, that means that the green flashing or steady light, the controller has lost either software or a program. That will be an indication that the controller can be sent in to be flushed and reprogrammed. And of course, when that happens, the controller and the monitor need to be sent in at the same time. The monitor that is on the console. It is, of course, another possibility to where instead of a green light, you may have a red light. That is actually a fatal condition for the controller, which in that situation means that it needs to be replaced. It cannot be fixed. Anytime, of course, the controller is being ordered to be replaced, it will come pre-programmed and ready to go to the end user. Now, another thing that is very, very important, and that is something that needs to be done upon the receipt of on any sweeper, A7, A8, or A9. There are software versions that they need to be written somewhere just in case the monitor goes out. Now, in order to see those software versions, you go here and you push maintenance, and at that point, the software versions are actually noted here. It is necessary and it is a good idea those software versions to be written somewhere just in case that the monitor goes out. That way, anytime that the controller and the monitor needs to be turned in for reprogramming, we will know what kind of software it's in the controller to be after it's been flushed. So the control console is situated with 3 switch banks and of course a joystick. The joystick, all it's actually there is to lift and lower the hopper and close and open the door, the dump door. Okay. Now the switch banks, of course, the top switch bank is actually activating the water system. Okay, right below, of course, we have the lights and the sweeping head down, and right below we have the broom functions. Now at some point, of course, it's going to be the possibility that you may have a switch that is going bad. If that possibility comes up, that the switch is bad, you cannot actually replace a switch. You have to replace the whole switch bank. Now, the switch banks are not interchangeable simply because they're programmed differently. So if for some reason a switch on the top switch bank is actually going bad, you have to replace the top switch bank. Now, we're going to open up the top of the console so we can actually see how the switch banks are actually hooked up on the back. Now we're on the back side. These are the switch banks on the back side of the control console. These are connectors for the switch banks themselves. They actually just 4 wires going to it, and of course this comes straight out of the harness, and this is the switch bank itself. So when the switch bank is being ordered, it comes in ready with the plug, the Deutsch plug that can be plug and play. Now, so even though that it might be an indication that there is a bad switch on the switch bank, it is a possibility that is actually not. So therefore, there is a way to actually figure out how to do and how to troubleshoot to make sure that that actually switch is bad or is not. So you don't have to spend the money and get a switch bank and the problem not be there. So at that point, what we need to do is we need to go here and actually we go here and push maintenance. When you push maintenance, you come into a different screen. At that point, of course, you're going to have to put a code in order to be able to do your troubleshooting. The code is F2 escape and right arrow at the same time for 3 seconds. And then right here it says service access level, and it's going to change from 0 to 2. We're in a service access level 2. As you can see here, the inputs are highlighted. Right below are the outputs, the inclination sensor, and then CAN switch banks. So we're going to scroll down to where it says CAN switch banks. We're going to put enter or OK. At that point, you can actually access any switch on the front of the console, and you can actually troubleshoot to make sure that switch is good. So here we can push this switch on. Red light will come on the up position. Red light will come on the down position. That tells us that that particular switch is good. Okay? And at the same time, right here is going to tell you switch bank 1, switch number 3. Switch bank 1, switch number 3. Now, what is actually happening when you do that? All you're doing is sending a command from here to the controller, and the controller sends an answer back that he got the command, and it sends you back the OK. That is the way that you can test every switch on the front of the console to make sure there's nothing wrong with the switch. Anytime there needs to be any kind of troubleshooting, on the electrical system, on the CAN bus electrical system. Always, in order to do that, you're going to have to go in to maintenance, push maintenance. You're going to change on the front of the monitor will change to the maintenance screen, and then of course you're going to have to go in again and put the code, which is F2, escape, and right arrow at the same time, and the 0 is turning to 2. 1 is there, then you can actually go back and start doing troubleshooting within the system. So right now we're going to go up to where it says inputs. Okay, on the inputs. Anything that is highlighted, that means that that particular sensor is activated. Okay? From what we see here is that the hopper is actually seated, so that means that the hopper is down. So therefore, the hopper seated proximity switch is actually sending in a signal stating that the hopper is down and it's good to go. Okay. The other thing that we see here is that the water level sensor is actually activated. Okay. At that point, that means that the water level is actually out, and the level switch, it is stating that that is activated as well. So we'll go to the next screen. As you can see, there is actually more highlighted functions there, and those are actually stating that those particular sensors that are actually activated, sending the information into your console. Now we'll go back, and then of course we'll go down to the outputs. Now the outputs, of course, right here, it's a very, very good troubleshooting tool to have when it comes to troubleshooting functions like hydraulic functions and any kind of sweeping functions on the sweeper itself. So when you push OK, there is a big list of functions that they're actually listed here. So we're going to go down to a function like, for instance, head down, the sweeping head down. At that point, all we have to do is push OK or enter, actually OK, and at that point, the head down arrow is actually going to start blinking. So if we go out to the directional valve for the sweeping head, that valve is actually going to be lit, which means that there is power to that valve. Nothing has to be running. All you do is actually troubleshooting the electrical system to make sure that there's power going all the way from the switch to the valve on the back of the hydraulic system. So now, of course, when the arrow is blinking, the power to that particular valve is actually on. So you should be able to see the light coming on the valve. Now, you have to push OK again to discontinue the power going to that valve. At that point, the arrow is actually going to stop blinking, and then you can go to a different function, and at that point you can actually see the light coming on again. So we can go down to the left gutter broom light. Okay, we can put OK again, and that time the light is actually going, the arrow is actually going to start blinking, and therefore you can actually go to the left gutter broom light, and that one should be coming on at that point. Now, what we're actually doing, we're forcing the function to come on from inside the console. So you don't have to be in two places at the same time. You can do everything from inside the console, inside the cab of the chassis. So whatever functions they are listed on the monitor, considering, of course, they are those functions on the sweeper itself as options, of course, then you can actually force the function from the console in order to get those turned on if for some reason they're not coming on from the switch or they're not coming on in the back. This is a powerful tool when it comes to CAN bus electrical system, to where you can actually do all this troubleshooting from inside the cab to find out electrical issues and actually troubleshoot those, because this system is actually going to point you where to go to find the problem. Continue with electrical on the A7s, A8s, and A9s, the regenerative air sweepers. The power to the main control box, which is behind the cab on the left-hand side, the power to that control box is actually coming out from the 80 amp breaker that is actually mounted directly into the battery box of the chassis. The power to the 80 amp breaker comes directly from the positive side of the truck batteries. So that means that the chassis and the sweeper share the same batteries. And that is pretty much what they share. Now, straight out of the positive of the batteries goes to the 80 amp breaker. From the 80 amp breaker goes directly into the power relay of the controller. Eventually, at some point or time, you may not have power directly into the control box behind the cab. So if that is the case, you can come straight into the 80 amp breaker. At that point, you're going to see that the 80 amp breaker is tripped. If that is the case, that tells you directly that you have a very, very major short. That will be with a wire larger than 12 gauge. Now, of course, at that point, all you have to do is reset the breaker. Whenever that clicks, that breaker is actually reset. Then you can go back and activate all the functions through the control box. If it actually trips again, therefore there is a major problem that needs to be rectified. The power, of course, from the 80 amp breaker comes through the 6 gauge wire from the 80 amp breaker to the isolator, the power isolator on the control box, and then from there it powers your power relay. The power relay is a 15 volt 200 amp Watt Rogers power relay, and from there, of course, you're actually powering up the fuse boxes that they're mounted right next to it. From there, of course, the fuse boxes, they actually powering up other functions of the control box, including, of course, the IFM controller. So when the power comes into the isolator, if you have power into your 80 amp breaker on your battery box, you should have 12 volts coming here. From here, of course, you're going to the power relay, and from the power relay into the fuse boxes. If you don't have power coming to the fuse boxes, therefore you lost your power somewhere between the power isolator and, of course, the power relay. It is, of course, a possibility that the power relay has actually shorted out if you do not have power, if you have power going in and you do not have power coming out of it. As previously noted, the sweeper is actually working with CAN bus communication. It is a possibility, of course, at some point or time, the monitor is actually going to tell you that there is a communication problem between the console and the controller. Okay? Now, at that point, you can actually troubleshoot the problem just by checking the communication lines, that there are 2 inside the console and 2 inside the control box. So we're going to go to the control box first and actually look at those 2 communication lines. So we are at the control box. These are the 2 communication lines. Of course, everything that there is, electrical-wise, everything is actually labeled. Okay, so the 2 communication lines you can see right here, this is a J1939 and this is the CAN open. Those are the 2 communication lines that we are going to troubleshoot. So at that point, what we need to do is we need to take the resistor at the end of the communication line, and we're going to put a micrometer at the end of the communication line here, and at that point we should be reading 120 ohms. Then we're going to take the other resistor out, and we are going to check the resistance on the other communication line, and we should be reading there 120 ohms. Now, next, we're going to go inside the console, and we're going to do the same test. Now we are inside the console. These are the two communication lines inside the console. So here as well, we're going to take the resistor out, and we're going to ohm and check the resistance on each one of the communication lines. We should be reading here as well 120 ohms. If we do not read 120 ohms, then we're going to have to check the communication line from the console all the way to the back of the control box to see where it is cut, pinched, or even shorted out. At that point, of course, that needs to be fixed where that break is. Of course, as you can see, even though that you're going to have to go back and find where that communication line is break, you can see that it is very easy to actually troubleshoot the communication lines to make sure that there is no problem on those lines. Now we are inside the console. These are the two communication lines inside the console. So here as well, we're going to take the resistor out, and we're going to ohm and check the resistance on each one of the communication lines. We should be reading here as well 120 ohms. If we do not read 120 ohms, then we're going to have to check the communication line from the console all the way to the back of the control box to see where it is cut, pinched, or even shorted out. At that point, of course, that needs to be fixed where that break is. Of course, as you can see, even though that you're going to have to go back and find where that communication line is break, you can see that it is very easy to actually troubleshoot the communication lines to make sure that there is no problem on those lines. A very important aspect that I would like to point out on our electrical system, especially the wiring, as you can see inside and pretty much every wiring that it's required to operate the machine, you can actually see the function labeled on each one of the wires every 4 to 5 inches apart. So you can see, you can actually read the function on the wire. So therefore you don't have to have a list or actually a chart to go and find out what the wire is actually represent. You can actually see the function on the wire, and you can follow that all the way from the console, actually from the control box, all the way to the back of the unit. These are tools for the technicians anytime that they tackle electrical problems, to where, of course, a lot of times they seem to be very, very difficult to troubleshoot. These are tools that actually will give him the easy way to find out the problem and fix it. Continuing with our control box, you can see that we have 6 Deutsch connectors on the side of the control box. Even though there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that doesn't mean, of course, that they are labeled that way. Okay. Now, the top one, of course, is number 3, and then, of course, is number 5, number 4, number 1, number 4, number 6. Those are different numbers on those Deutsch plugs. Those Deutsch plugs represent different harnesses that they go to different places of the sweeper itself. Okay. Now, the top, of course, the top harness represents all the hydraulics. Okay. That will be number 3 harness. Okay. From here, you can see there is actually a single harness, comes out, and then, of course, it splits and goes and powers up each one of the 2 manifolds, the front one and the rear. Continuing continued on the control box, we have a series of diodes that actually inside the box, those diodes are there for any kind of spikes on the voltage. So the diodes are there so there's no harm done on any kind of the functions that the spikes are actually occurring to. The other thing that we see inside the box, of course, there's 3 continuous duty solenoids. Those continuous duty solenoids, they're powering up, of course, the hopper shaker that is mounted on the bottom of the hopper, and it is there to shake apart any kind of buildup that is on the floor of the hopper. And then, of course, we've got the 2 water pumps powering up the water system on the sweeper. Those are actually 12-volt continuous duty solenoids, 75 amps. As we noted, even though the CAN bus system for the sweepers is a very, very easy part to troubleshoot and run the sweeper with, eventually it's a very, very finicky system. So what I'm trying to say is, of course, the controller is actually reading center amperage, certain amperage from different functions of the sweeper. For example, if the broom light, it actually goes out, it is very, very important to make sure that the light that is going to replace that actually has the same amperage as the one that is being replaced. Which means that if you go somewhere and get a curb light and it's got bigger amperage than what the one that is you're replacing it, that means that the controller is actually going to give you a communication error simply because it's trying to recognize the amperage that is not there. So we are back at the console, and we are going to show a few more troubleshooting items that you're probably going to have to face at some point or time. So again, we're going to go to maintenance, and then of course F2, escape, and right arrow, hold 3 seconds, and then we are in service access level 2, and then we'll go down to timer set points. The timer set points, it is a optional setting there to where it actually tells the controller how many seconds it will take, for the example, for the broom to go down and start spinning. The next item, of course, that is highlighted is timer set points. Timer set points are presets that the factory is actually putting there, and what they do is actually they read how much time, how many seconds it takes after you activate a function until that function is actually operating. So therefore, there is no need for that to be changed or troubleshoot for that matter, simply because it has nothing to do with operation. So the next item down will be calibration. At this point, when it comes to calibration and we go into that, the first item that we actually see here is the weight sensor calibration. Okay? Now, there is a step-by-step instructions in the manual how to calibrate the weight sensor. Now, what happens is, of course, if for some reason you see in the monitor that there is a problem with the weight, or actually if you are getting a alarm that you are overweight, okay, you can actually have one of 2 things. Either the weight sensor is out of calibration, or the sensor itself is actually bad. So following step-by-step instructions, you can go in here and actually set everything up. The next item, of course, you go here and you go motor speeds, and you work on that. And then, of course, what we see here is actually your left and your right broom, and this calibrates the broom at the minimum and the maximum speed of the broom. The broom should be running somewhere around 105 RPMs. So therefore, that will be your 100% speed of the broom. From there, you actually can come down to all the way down to where there is no speed of the broom. The broom speed valves that they're actually mounted on the back of the directional valve of the brooms, and that one is a proportional valve to where it actually allows more or less flow to go through for more or less speed of the broom. Next one is dealer options, and there is a list of options that the dealer is ordering from the manufacturer to put on. So anything that is actually highlighted on that list, that means that is activated and it is workable from the console itself. Anything that is not activated, that means that is not on the sweeper itself. Now, at that point, of course, if the end user, if the customer requires a special option to be put on the truck, we can actually send out the hardware to be put on. The wiring, of course, is already there. All they have to do, put the hardware on, plug it up, and then the dealer can come here and put a special code in and turn the option on to the controller. Now, the next part is the lift bleeder adjustment. That is the door that actually enhances the sweeping conditions. That means that it's either more exhaust or more blast on the sweeping head. And you can actually set up the sensor from here. Now, anytime, of course, the sensor has to be replaced, that has to be recalibrated from here, and of course the calibration step-by-step instructions are in the manual. And you can actually go there and do that. The next part, it is very, very important anytime that the controller and the monitor is sent out to be flushed and reprogrammed. We at the factory, when we get the controller and the monitor in, we need to know exactly what kind of sweeper you have or the customer has. Therefore, we need to know whether it's an A7 Tornado, an A8 Twister, or an A9 Monsoon, simply because the controller is actually supposed to recognize the sensors that they are on that sweeper in order to be able to correctly operate. So therefore, if you have an A7 and it shows that it is set up for an A8, you're going to have all kinds of communication errors. So therefore, you're going to have to come out here, and then of course you go and change and highlight the item that you got. For instance, if that is highlighted as an A8, you can go back to A7 Tornado, and then of course OK that, and then you change the setup to an A7 Tornado. This is actually all the functions that you can have on the monitor of the CANBUS system on the regenerative air sweepers.